things like got really scary. And I remember like Caleb left and the nurse like comes over to me and she's like, the anesthesiologist, she's like, we're gonna start giving you some more medicines and you're losing more blood than like you should be. And they were very calm but I can hear like the doctors, you can hear them through the whole thing. And I'm laying there and she's like, you're losing a pretty good amount of blood. And in my mind, I'm starting to like go in and out of like consciousness. Like I was so tired and exhausted and I'm like getting sick. Like I'm throwing up to the sides of me and I can feel them like putting pressure because I had started hemorrhaging and losing a lot of blood. And I think being alone during that was like pretty scary and like sad. And the whole night after that was just kind of a nightmare, not gonna lie. And I was alone for a lot of it. And not like your fault, I don't blame you. Mm-hmm. I told you to go be with CJ, but I ended up being in the recovery room for like...
Well, the nurse, I came back to see you because I was going like back and forth between the rooms, and she's like, yeah, recovery's, even out of the surgery room, like recovery is usually an hour to 2 hours. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I think I came back one more time, and the nurse was like, let me just get your number, and then I'll text you when she's going to the whatever's after post room, whatever it's called. I'm like, okay. I tried to stay up because this was like...
It was like it was almost 4 a.m. at this point.
Well, at that point, I think it was like 2. And so I like tried to stay up as long as possible because I was like, okay, within the next hour, she'll be out. And I was just exhausted. So I fell asleep in the NICU room with CJ. And I think I woke up because I was so exhausted, but I couldn't sleep at the same time. So then I texted the nurse, like, any update? And I think she was like, no. I don't remember. I honestly, don't remember.
Yeah, it's all blur. I mean, I was in and out of sleep, too. Like, I think you came in and I was asleep at one point. But, yeah, that whole, recovery afterward was just pretty sad.
Did we say it took, instead of, 1 to 2 hours, it was 4 hours?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, the bleeding they didn't know that the bleeding had stopped, but I just kept losing blood. Because, they come and press on your stomach and stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be graphic, but... Yeah, it was just a lot, and they wanted to make sure that they had closed the made sure the hemorrhaging was closed up correctly, and I actually had to stop bleeding. But at one point, they came in and they were like, "Hey, if you keep losing blood, here are your options," and they just weren't good options. I don't know what they were. One was surgery, and I'm pretty sure it would have been to go in and I don't know. I was like, would I lose my fertility with these options? And she's like, it's a possibility. So it was just a lot to go through that night,
Thank you for opening up about that.
Yeah.
Hemorrhaging, what is that? I'm like,
what does that word mean?
Yeah, what does that word mean?
Honestly, I don't know. I just know when it means bleeding.
Yeah.
Hemorrhage means blood.
Yeah.
I think.
It's not clotting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was your abdomen, your uterus, all the above.
Mm-hmm. So when they took out my placenta, typically when you remove the placenta, your uterus contracts to cut off the blood vessels that were originally going into that organ. Mine was so exhausted just from the whole labor process and pushing for so long and then going into surgery. Instead of my uterus contracting, it just went limp. And so it didn't cut off the blood vessels and it just kept bleeding. So I ended up losing over half of my hemoglobins.
Wow.
And they kept us in the hospital so long because they thought I was going to need a blood transfusion, but thankfully, I was healthy going in, and I had a very high level of blood before that. I didn't end up needing a transfusion.
Did you say how much you lost?
I lost over 2,500 units, which I think with a normal C-section, you lose about 1,000 units, and I lost over 2.5 times.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. What, could you see... I guess they just had to keep coming up and wiping the blood away, or was was it mainly internally, I guess?
Yeah, so it was internal, so they'd press on my stomach and
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it just kept, every time they'd press on my stomach, more would come out, and so they weren't sure if I was continuously bleeding or if it was old blood.
They weigh
Got it.
those
Yeah.
pads that we're on to know how much blood you've lost.
I will say during the whole thing, I felt very at peace, and maybe it's because I was so tired. I definitely felt God's peace over me and all the prayers leading up to that point. I felt very I was like, it's okay. Whatever happens is okay. this is part of God's plan for me. This was his plan for our birth. It's okay. But it was just, yeah. Now looking back, I'm like, whoa, that was really scary.
Isn't that interesting? I feel like the things like with birth, the beginning is such a cloud, but it isn't until later where obviously we had totally different birth experiences. But I'm thinking about with Griffin where I was like, yeah, I think I need to work through that. Like, that was kind of scary. Like, I feel scared about the thought of doing that again.
Yes.
And it wasn't until later, because, like, right afterwards, I was like, woo, like, I don't know. I was in fantasy land. But, it's so weird how that kind of comes later. But I think that's a very normal thing that I just didn't expect to happen.